you will want to configure some settings before starting your drawing, like for instance text and dimensions. Text properties are accessed from the inspector. If I select a piece of text, I can access the font property and the text color. But when I have text selected, I'm only changing that piece of text. Make sure all text is deselected. Click the Text button in the inspector, and then change your text properties for what you'd like all subsequent notes to be. You can change this at any time. These new defaults remain until changed and are saved in the drawing. And the same for dimensions. Select a dimension, and when I change colors and properties, I'm only changing that dimension. I've changed the format of that selected dimension. I'll place another dimension now. You'll notice that the new format is not used. So if dimensions are selected, changing the formats only changes the dimensions that are selected, not changing the settings for subsequent dimensions. So deselect all of the dimensions, click the Dimensions button in the inspector. Without placing a dimension, make the changes to the dimension format so that all subsequent dimensions will take on those properties. So the rule of thumb is when setting preferences for text and dimensions, deselect text and dimensions, then open up the inspector and set up new formats for your text and your dimensions as new defaults. You may also wish to set up some other preferences before starting your drawing, like for instance the units of measurement and the reference grid. We'll move this up just a bit, and let's talk about the grid. From the origin of the drawing, there are 5 main divisions of the grid visible, with 4 subdivisions within each one. The grids are based on your unit of measurement. The spacing is the distance in your units between each of the major grid lines. The subspacing is the small incremental divisions between each grid line. The grid size is how many of those grid spaces from the origin of the drawing to the edge of the grid. So if each of the grid lines is an inch apart, then from the origin to the right of the drawing, that's 5 of those grid lines or grid spaces, so that would be 5 inches. So the grid settings are based on your units of measurement. Just measure here, and you'll see it's about an inch. Just kind of picking points. If we go back to our preferences, and we change the unit of measurement to feet, and apply that, now the grid lines will be 1 unit apart, or a foot. 4 subdivisions means that each of the sub-grid lines, or those subdivisions, will be 3 inches. So remember, the grid is broken down by a major grid spacing between the lines, subgrid spaces, which are divisions of the major grid space. Back to our units, and you can switch between dots as subdivisions or grid lines. If we change to feet, inch, fractions, the unit of measurement also allows you to set the precision. This will affect any place a length, size, or dimension is displayed.